Hey guys, Rox here. I'm pretty close to completely min-maxing my Chain Lightning build now that it's been a couple weeks into the season. I've done a few changes along the way, so if you've been following my build planners, you may have noticed those changes. Azurewrath, Frostburn, and Shroud finally got re-enabled, and I've been getting a lot of questions about why I'm not using Shroud or Azurewrath, so I'd like to cover those items and personally the reasons why I'm not using them. I will also go over how to sustain mana in this build, which has probably been my most asked question this season. I'll go over my gear, my skills, my Paragon, etc. I do have a starter variant of the build on my planner page as well, which I will also cover. However, this build doesn't really come online unless you have decent gear, and at the very least, the Ring of Starless Skies, which is a mythic, and a lot of people have issues getting mythics. So I will cover everything in this guide, so stay tuned and let's go over it. Alright, let's go over our gear. Up first is our helmet, and this is the Mythic Heir of Perdition. We're going to use this because it's a 60% multiplier and it has very high crit chance on it. This is similar to Godslayer Crown, but with permanent uptime on that 60% multiplier. The lucky hit is also very nice for this build, as we have several lucky hit things that we need to proc via our Frostburn gloves, and lucky hit to restore primary resource that we have tempered on our amulet. Originally, I was using GA crit chance that was triple crit through the masterworking. Triple critting is typically your endgame goal for a lot of builds, but it can be unrealistic. So what we're doing is we're gonna supplement this via the Gar rune. So this gives us 2.5 critical strike chance for 5 seconds up to 25%. So basically all that means is that we need at the very bare minimum 75% crit chance. And that way we won't have to actually hit any masterworking crits on crit strike chances at all if you have a GA one. So here I tried to triple crit the lucky hit chance, but unfortunately I failed, but 2 out of 3 is fine for me. You can also socket 2 diamonds in here. This will give us extra all stats, and we're going to need that for unlocking bonus stats on the yellow nodes on our Paragon board. So why Raiment over Shroud? I will use this video as an example for why Raiment is my choice. And while this may be an extreme example, ranged mobs are no stranger to us while in the pit. We can socket the Cry rune, which gives us access to the Spiritborn's Vortex for grouping. It is nice for the initial pull-in, and great if you can one-shot the groups of monsters quickly. However, when pushing and we can no longer one-shot, mobs constantly become unstoppable. This will result in them likely being unstoppable when Vortex procs, therefore being immune to our crowd control. We have little control over when Vortex procs, and with Axial Conduit equipped, we want mobs pixel stacked tightly for the AoE explosion. Shroud with the Cry rune can become quite frustrating when mobs have higher HP and can no longer be grouped. Raiment allows us to have full control when grouping. It is much easier to group mobs via teleporting when they are no longer unstoppable. Another issue is if the mobs are LOS'd or if we are out of their line of sight and there's a piece of terrain or geo in the way, Vortex will not pull them in as they get blocked by the geo. Vortex's range can also be a problem if a mob is at the edge of the screen. While the damage gained from each piece is very similar, the power Raiment gives us in constantly grouping the mobs together is unmatched. Shroud gives us much better survivability, but if geared correctly, this really isn't needed. Shroud use in general content outside of the pit is perfectly okay, as everything will die quickly anyways. But while pushing the highest tiers in the pit that's possible for Chain Lightning, Raiment is unmatched. On our Raiment, we are going to want a Greater Affix to Glass Cannon, followed by Int. The other 2 stats are less important. The stun duration on this piece is also pretty irrelevant, and we are going to try to triple Masterwork Glass Cannon. For our runes, we are going to socket Pock and Ohm. Because we are spending so much mana on this build, Pock allows us to have permanent uptime on the Ohm Warcry rune. For our gloves, we are using Frostburn. Frostburn somewhat survived the stat squish this season. It didn't get hit nearly as hard as Azurewrath did, which I'll cover in a second. Frostburn's stats are high enough to justify losing a legendary aspect. They have very high attack speed, and the cold and fire is nice too. but ultimately we use these gloves due to the 2 lucky hit procs of fire and cold damage. The numbers are pretty high. So you absolutely are going to want a GA on both lucky hits if you can. Try to triple masterwork the lucky hit to cold, since we take Icy Touch in the skill tree, but hitting all 3 on fire or a combo of fire and cold is fine as well. Finally, the aspect number on the bottom is pretty irrelevant, so a 20% pair would be just fine. You'll just stagger the boss slightly slower. Our pants are axial conduits, nothing new here. They buff chain lightning significantly. The temper changed from chance to cast twice to chance to hit twice, which was a buff. This also drains less mana as we are no longer casting twice. Overall, a very good change to these pants. The most important thing on these pants is the aspect number on the bottom. Absolutely go for a max roll of that lightning damage first. Greater affixes, chance to hit twice, followed by GA resource and generation maximum. Resource generation maximum affects all of our resource gained, so this will affect things like lucky hit to restore, mana per second, picking up crackling energy that gives mana, etc. For example, you can see that my mana regen here is 16. So now if I pop on a pair of boots that have this 8 mana per second, instead of it being 8 plus 16, making it 24, it jumps up to 30. And that's because it is influenced by this resource generation and maximum on the axial conduit pants. Triple crit chance for chain lightning to hit twice. A triple crit on this greater affix, paired with a triple crit max roll on the focus, will yield us 99.3% chance to hit twice. So not quite 100%, but close enough. We're going to socket the Tam and Gar rune combo. As I mentioned before, Gar will give us 25% crit chance while in combat, making our crit chance 100%. For our boots, get a pair with GA Int if you can, followed by max life and armor. Imprint Orange Herald onto them. This will make sure our ultimate, Unstable Currents, has permanent uptime. Temper Lucky Hit to freeze as we take the Hoarfrost passive in the skill tree for extra damage, and Temper Evade cooldown to help with our teleport enchant. Make sure the boots have the implicit Attacks Reduce Evades cooldown to also help with the teleport enchant, and try to triple masterwork Intelligence. For our main hand weapon, we want a legendary sword. During my testing with Azurewrath, I found that it did not perform better than a legendary sword with an aspect. Azurewrath is not a great candidate for the pit pushing variant. It should be fine for all other content if you choose to use it. It has some stats on it that make it unfavorable, and that's mainly why I'm not using it. All stats is nice, but we lose out on a ton of int. The cold resist is also a pretty dead stat here for us as we won't need it. The aspect on the bottom also only has a 20% chance, making it harder to proc. And since I'm using Splintering in this variant, we want as much crit damage as possible, so the legendary sword wins. We use a sword because swords have an extra 17.5% crit strike damage implicit. Go for GA Int, max life, and crit damage. If you have a very high chance for chain lightning to hit twice, we can use Elemental Surge for a temper, and go for either cold, lightning, or fire. Lightning and fire will be easier to hit as you have a 2 out of 3 chance to hit it. Get as high of a number as possible on this Elemental Surge temper. For our second temper, go for crit strike damage and try to triple crit that via masterworking. Alternatively, if your chance for chain lightning to hit twice is low, you can use a sword like this. Instead of tempering Elemental Surge on your sword, you can temper chance for chain lightning to hit twice. Between the axial conduits, the sword, and the focus, you can reach 100% no problem. Once you're at 100%, you can masterwork your sword with crit damage. Regardless of which sword variant you choose, socket an emerald for more crit damage. Imprint Aspect of Shredding Blades on your sword. This question comes up a lot, especially in a build that we don't use ice blades on in our skill bar like Fireball or Firebolt. For those builds, we use it because the second sentence of the aspect reads, you gain 30% multiplier of vulnerable damage. And yes, it works without having ice blades on your bar. For our amulet, try to get one with GA Int, as well as Conjuration Mastery and Devouring Blaze. Conjuration Mastery buffs damage and mana regen. Devouring Blaze increases our crit strike damage against burning and crowd-controlled enemies. Specifically for this variant, we are using Splintering. Splintering scales with crit damage, and it helps us clear the trash faster while pit pushing. It will, however, make the boss take longer. so it's better for bosses with adds, but you can still take down solo bosses with this build. Temper crit strike damage and lucky hit to restore resource to help with mana. Try to triple Conjuration Mastery if you can, and pop in a skull for armor. If you're struggling to find an amulet this season, you can always try substituting one of the following stats for Glass Cannon, cooldown reduction, or attack speed. Both of our rings are pretty standard, Tal Rasha's and Starless. For Tal Rasha's, try to get as close to 25% as possible. I'd say non-physical greater affix is more important than cooldown reduction. Non-physical is buffing our key passive Enlightenment, so try to triple Masterwork the non-physical, but any combo of cooldown and non-physical is fine. Our second ring is Starless Skies. As always, this helps with resource and damage. Try to get a GA attack speed one and triple crit that. Socket skulls in both of the rings for armor. Our final piece of gear is our offhand. Try to get one with GA int and max life if possible. For the third stat, try to get cooldown. Temper chain lightning to hit twice and crit damage. Depending on which sword variant you choose will determine your masterworking, so either chance to hit twice or crit strike damage. Imprint Storm Swell for increased damage when ice armor is active, which it should pretty much always be active unless it gets broken, and Socket and Emerald for more crit damage. Another commonly asked question I get is how I'm able to sustain mana. One thing I forgot to mention earlier about Frostburn, and another reason why they are great, is because this lucky hit to proc cold damage also procs Frigid Breeze. And Frigid Breeze gives us mana, and this is also buffed by Axial Conduit's Resource and Generation Maximum stat, so this is a pretty nice combo to help with mana sustain. Between this and the lucky hit to restore temper on our amulet, this should be enough to sustain our mana. However, if you still find yourself struggling, you can replace cooldown reduction on your focus with lucky hit to restore mana instead. I also like to spec a point or two into Invigorating Conduit, so I restore mana when I pick up Crackling Energy. And if this is still not enough, try popping a Resource Elixir as well. Alright, let's quickly go over the starter variant of this build. This build really doesn't feel great without the Ring of Starless Skies. It helps tremendously with resource and damage, but if you're looking to change over to Chain Lightning and you can only make one Mythic, I highly recommend making Starless over Perdition first. However, if you don't have a Starless, you are absolutely going to have the recharging aspect. This aspect is unlocked via the Zenith dungeon, however, it will be a minimum roll and it will only give you 1 mana per bounce. This really isn't enough. I'd recommend at least 3 mana per bounce, and I found mine by rolling resource caches in the den. But if you're stuck with a min roll of recharging, I'd probably recommend imprinting the aspect on your amulet instead of your ring, as it will give you a higher value. The other pieces of gear you're definitely going to want is a pair of Axial Conduit pants. Without these pants, we're just playing regular Chain Lightning, and these pants really give us a big damage boost. For a helm, you're going to probably want to use Godslayer if you have no mythics. You could also use Shaco if you have that. If you have no raiment, you can just use a regular legendary chest with int, armor max life, or resist all. Imprint Snow Veiled on here to help us with unstoppable time via ice armor. For gloves, you can use regular gloves with lightning rod imprinted on them, but you should really pick up a pair of Frostburns. Frostburns, they drop from Varshan, and they help with mana issues via this cold damage proc and Frigid Breeze in our skill tree. For boots, we definitely want to pair with Orange Herald for unstable currents uptime. I've seen people using Rakanoths, and those will help with CDR and non-physical damage, but just make sure your armor capped or close to it, as those boots don't have armor on them, so you'd probably have to temper armor elsewhere, like on your pants or amulet. Both weapons are pretty much the same for most of the variants. You can sacrifice one of the affixes for lucky hit to restore mana. Get a Tal Rasha's from Varshan, as close to 25% as possible. For our amulet, this will likely be the hardest piece to get. I've heard some people are using Winterglass with a greater Conjuration Mastery affix. I tried Winterglass last season and it was fine, but I have not tested it this season. So if you're using Winterglass, throw a comment below and let me know if it's working for you or not. Of course, it won't be nearly as much damage as an Intelligence Devouring Conjuration Mastery Ami, but Winterglass is much easier to acquire from Lord Zir. You can always substitute an affix for glass cannon, cooldown reduction, or attack speed on your amulet as well. Finally, feel free to mix and match the uniques from this starter variant and the mythic variant as you acquire them. For our mercenaries, I've chosen to use Rahir and Variana. We're going to go down the right side of the skill tree all the way down to inspiration. This is going to give us a 15 and 25% multipliers when this is active. He's also going to give us 15% resist all elements to help us reach our resist cap. I'm using Variana's Bloodthirst, as this is going to give us plus 10% attack speed, and I have that active just when I press any skill in combat. So I've gotten a lot of questions on how I reach armor and resist cap in tier 4. As you can see, I have 850 armor. The only armor that I currently have is on my boots, and it's not even greater affix. And this number is perfect because once we pop this here, this Soothing Spices, it's going to give us 150 armor, which will put us exactly at armor cap. It's also going to give us 10% resist to all elements. So I'll go ahead and pop that here. We're exactly at 1000. And we're at 56.2. So how do we get the remainder? This is from potent warding in our skill tree. It gives us 15% more. So now we will be well over the resist cap while we are in combat. All right, now that I've popped the Soothing Spice and our resistance are at 56, I'll just show you while I'm in combat. As you can see, they're pretty much almost capped now. And of course, you can always spec some more points into the skill tree here, into potent warding, and you can get even higher if needed. However, if your armor is still too low, you can always pop a Song of the Mountain. This will give you an extra 200 armor. And if your health is too low, feel free to pop an Elixir of Fortitude, and this will buff your HP to help with ice armor uptime. Alright, for our 2 enchants, we will be taking Teleport and Ice Blades enchant. Teleport turns our regular evade into a teleport, and this will help us traverse through dungeons quicker. It also applies the Shimmering teleport, which gives us 30% damage reduction each time we TP. This will also help with grouping mobs for raiment, and this is a must on my pit pushing variant. As you can see, I do not play with teleport on my bar in this variant, so this enchant is needed. Our second enchant is Ice Blades. Ice Blade enchant allows us to pass the Ice Blade's conjuration limit from 3 to 6 Ice Blades out at a time. This will help significantly with the cooldown of our other spells, thus allowing us to have higher and faster uptime on our Enlightenment key passive. And this will also help with mana, as more Ice Blades equals more Frigid Breeze procs. Alright, let's go over our skill tree. So we'll put 2 points in Firebolt to get us started. We're going to max out Chain Lightning with 5 points in there, go all the way down to Greater Chain Lightning for more damage. Put 3 points in Elemental Dominance for extra Chain Lightning damage. 1 point in Flame Shield just to get it on our bar. 1 point in Teleport, let's go down the tree to Shimmering. Then this will apply this 30% every time that we Teleport Evade as well, which is really nice. 3 points in Glass Cannon. We're going to go down all the way to Shimmering Ice Armor. This will help ensure that we have pretty much 100% uptime on our Ice Armor because we are spending so much mana so quickly. We're going to max out Precision Magic because we do have a lot of lucky hit in this build. We're going to go all the way down to Summoned Ice Blades. This is going to apply cooldown to all of our other spells, which is very much needed in this build. Let's take 3 points in Protection to help keep us alive. We're going to put 2 points into Enhanced Lightning Spear. And obviously Conjuration Mastery. This one's pretty self-explanatory. It's damage per conjuration out, it gives us movement speed, and most importantly, mana regeneration, which is very much needed in this build. I have 2 points in Mana Shield, which gives us damage reduction for survivability. Right here, Familiar is a little confusing. Most people don't really understand why I have this here. So basically, we do it for this Enhanced Familiar because this applies burning when you take it. And right now, when you have Unstable Currents and Flame Shield on your bar, Unstable Currents is only going to be spawning Fire Familiars. And that is the reason why I do not use Firebolt enchant on this build, because we are getting our burning. specifically from these fire familiars, which is very, very, very nice. All right, continuing along. We're going to go down the tree to Devouring Blaze. This is going to help us with a lot of damage, especially when enemies are crowd control via our frozen tempers that we have on a lot of our gear. These 2 points might not necessarily be needed. I just kind of take them as a backup for extra mana, and this will be influenced by our axial conduits, resource, and generation maximum. Obviously, elemental synergies, this is new, and it's going to give us extra damage. Cooldown reduction, pretty self-explanatory. I like taking 2 points in warmth. Honestly, even 3 is better. So if you ever get a little low, like this shoots you right back up to full health. It's kind of like Andariel's last season, so this is very nice. This area here is pretty important. Since we have so much chance to freeze on our gear, we want 3 points in Hoarfrost, so we pump out more damage to frozen enemies. Icy Touch is very nice, increased cold damage, and this is going to work from our Frostburns, lucky hit to deal cold damage, that will apply. And then Frigid Breeze, I've talked about this a few times, but between the Frostburn and the Ice Blades that we have out, this is going to help with our mana regen. And finally, we're going to take the Enlightenment key passive. This is a brand new key passive, and this helps with damage, mana regen, and attack speed. I will quickly go over our Paragon board. On our starting board, we are going to put Exploit here, and we're going to take all of the dexterity nodes that we can. Our second board is Frigid Fate, and we are going to socket Unleash right here. Unleash is really nice because this is also going to help with mana, it's going to help with damage, and if you take these decks here and these willpower nodes, they actually get buffed by Unleash, so this will help us with getting some of our yellow bonuses active as well further on in the board. Our third board here is going to be Fundamental Release. This is a brand new board to this season. It gives us a nice damage multiplier. And we're going to socket Tactician here. Tactician buffs these yellow nodes, so it's buffing Vuln, Non-Physical, and Int. Our fourth board here is Burning Instinct. Even though we don't necessarily need this legendary node, there's just a lot of really good yellow nodes on this board here. We got crit strike damage and damage to burning, so those will be good for the Splintering variant as well as the regular. We have damage reduction as well. We're going to socket Destruction here, and we're going to take all the dexterity nodes. And finally, our last board, we are going to put Elementalist on Static Surge. Static Surge is going to help making enemies vuln. It's also going to restore some of our mana back, which is, you know, very, very nice. And a lot of these nodes may not be active, so you may have to do some pathing just to make sure that once you pop like a Chorus of War, for example, for this will give me an extra 40 willpower. That's how I will be able to activate some of these nodes. Also, if you still aren't active on some of them, you can always socket diamonds into some of your gear as well. I have some questions about some of the other glyphs. Why like I'm using Exploit over, let's see, like Flame Feeder. So if we look at this here in our stat sheet, my vuln damage is just over 2,000. Now, if I take out this, so it looks like it would only give plus 153. And this, you know, this 10% multiplier. Let's take this out and see what it drops to. Yeah, so it drops significantly, like almost 550. So this is why I prefer to use Exploit over Flame Feeder. I just think it buffs it a little bit more. Of course, you're free to, you know, use whatever, you know, works best for you. Also, another question I get is about control. Control is really nice. However, it's going to be better for like the trash because they're going to constantly be crowd controlled. Whereas the boss, this really only works and is very effective during the boss's stagger. And we do stagger like an okay amount, but not enough, I feel like, to justify using this rune. Alright, I hope this video was informative and helpful to everyone wanting to play Chain Lightning. I'm still pretty new to making video guides, so if there's anything else you'd like to see that I may have missed or left out, please let me know in the comments. I do try to keep all of my planners updated. You can always swing by my Twitch stream and ask any questions you may have. I'm happy to answer them while I'm streaming. I have not tried pushing past Pit 101 on Chain Lightning, as I ran out of Forgotten Souls while I was trying to triple crit Glass Cannon on my Raiment. So here's my latest pit clear at tier 101. Thanks for watching my guide, and I'll catch you guys next time.